3 years, 1,095 days of silence. Not because I couldn't speak, but because I chose not to. While my husband thought he had the perfect, compliant wife who couldn't voice her objections, I was listening, watching, and planning. The day I finally spoke, it wasn't just words that came out of my mouth, it was the end of everything he thought he knew about our marriage. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Rebecca Morgan, and until 3 years ago, I lived what most people would consider a normal life in Portland, Oregon. I worked as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm, lived in a cozy 2-bedroom house with my husband of 7 years, Daniel, and spent weekends hiking the trails around Mount Hood. Daniel was a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties, charming and confident in that way that made clients trust him with their biggest investments. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in March. I was rushing to catch the bus to work when a delivery truck ran a red light. The impact sent me flying 20 feet, and when I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, the world was different. The doctors explained that I had suffered severe trauma to my larynx and surrounding areas. My vocal cords were damaged, and while they expected them to heal, there was no timeline for when or if my voice would return. Daniel was devastated, or at least he appeared to be. He held my hand in that sterile hospital room, tears in his eyes, promising that we would get through this together. He spoke to the doctors while I listened, unable to ask my own questions or voice my fears. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had always been the one who handled our important conversations, who made the phone calls to resolve disputes or negotiate better deals. Now Daniel would have to be my voice to the world. The first months were the hardest, not because of the physical recovery, but because of the isolation. Learning sign language became my lifeline, though Daniel was a reluctant student. He would attempt a few basic signs during our lessons with the speech therapist, but his patience wore thin quickly. "This is temporary," he would say. "We don't need to master a whole new language for something that's going to fix itself." But weeks turned into months, and my voice remained absent. The doctors grew less optimistic with each checkup. Sometimes Dr. Patricia Hendricks explained during one visit, "Psychological trauma can delay physical healing. Your body might be protecting itself in ways we don't fully understand." Daniel's behavior began to shift in subtle ways that I noticed but couldn't address. He started coming home later from work, claiming that, without me to help handle client calls and paperwork, he had to put in extra hours. He would take phone calls in the garage or step outside when his cell rang. When I tried to sign questions about his day, he would give brief responses and change the subject. The isolation was suffocating. My coworkers from the design firm visited less and less frequently. Conversations became one-sided affairs where they would talk at me rather than with me. I started to feel like a ghost in my own life, present but unable to participate in any meaningful way. Daniel began making decisions without consulting me, small things at first, like changing our internet provider or switching grocery stores, but gradually larger ones. He refinanced our mortgage without showing me the papers, explaining later that he didn't want to burden me with complicated financial stuff while I was recovering. It was during this time that I began to notice Melissa Santos. She worked at the same real estate office as Daniel, handling administrative tasks and client coordination. She was young, maybe 26, with the kind of effortless beauty that made other women feel invisible. I had met her briefly at the company Christmas party the year before my accident, where she had been polite but distant. Now her name started appearing in Daniel's conversations with increasing frequency. Melissa organized the client files, or Melissa suggested a new marketing approach for the downtown listings. He would mention stopping by the office on weekends to catch up on paperwork, always with Melissa there to help. When I asked in sign language why she was working so many extra hours, Daniel would shrug and say she was dedicated to her job. The first real sign something was wrong came 6 months after my accident. Daniel had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered, and it buzzed with a text message. The preview on the lock screen read, "Can't wait for tonight, same place." I stared at that message until the screen went dark, my mind racing through possible innocent explanations, but deep down I knew. That evening, Daniel announced he had to show a property to some out-of-town investors who could only meet after hours. He kissed my forehead and left, promising to be back by 10. I sat in our living room until midnight, watching the door, listening for his key in the lock. When he finally returned, he smelled like wine and expensive perfume, not his cologne but something floral and unfamiliar. I began paying closer attention to patterns. The late meetings that always seemed to involve Melissa. The new clothes Daniel bought, claiming he needed to upgrade his professional wardrobe. The way he would shower immediately after coming home from these evening appointments. The credit card statements that showed charges at restaurants I had never been to. Always for two people, always on nights when he claimed to be working alone. But the most telling sign was how he treated me. The man who had once included me in every decision, now barely sought my opinion on anything. He would make plans without consulting me, rearrange furniture without asking if I liked the new setup, even invite people over without giving me advance notice. When I tried to express frustration through sign language, he would look annoyed and say things like, "I can't always stop everything to figure out what you're trying to tell me." The speech therapist, Mrs. Karen Williams, began to notice my progress during our sessions. "Your vocal cords are healing beautifully," she said during one appointment. "Have you tried making any sounds at home? Even small ones?" I shook my head, signing that nothing came out when I tried. But that wasn't entirely true. In the privacy of our bathroom, with the shower running to mask any sound, I had been testing my voice for weeks. Whispers at first, then soft words, then full sentences. My voice was different, raspier, lower than before, but it was there. I kept this secret for reasons I couldn't fully articulate at the time. Perhaps I sensed that my silence had become a kind of protection, a way to observe my life from the outside, without the burden of having to react in real time. Or maybe I was afraid that speaking would force me to confront truths I wasn't ready to face. The breaking point came 8 months after my accident. Daniel had been acting especially secretive, taking calls in the car before coming inside, spending entire weekends at the office. I decided to surprise him with lunch on a Saturday, something I hadn't done since before my accident. I took a taxi to his office building, carrying a bag of sandwiches from his favorite deli. The building was mostly empty, as expected for a weekend. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor where his real estate office was located. The main door was unlocked, and I could hear voices coming from Daniel's private office. I walked quietly down the hallway, planning to knock and surprise him, but as I approached his door, I heard laughter. His laugh, mixed with a woman's. Through the gap in the partially open door, I could see them. Daniel was sitting on the edge of his desk, and Melissa was standing between his legs, her hands on his shoulders. They were kissing with the familiarity of people who had done this many times before. I stood frozen in that hallway, watching my husband with another woman, unable to scream or cry out, or do any of the things a person should do in that moment. The bag of sandwiches slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. Neither of them heard it. They were too absorbed in each other to notice the woman in the doorway, whose world was crumbling in complete silence. I turned and walked back to the elevator, my legs moving automatically while my mind struggled to process what I had seen. During the taxi ride home, I stared out the window at the city I had lived in for years, and it looked completely foreign, like I was seeing it for the first time. The driver asked if I was okay, and I could only nod, pointing to my throat and shaking my head to indicate I couldn't speak. That night, Daniel came home with takeout Chinese food and a story about spending the day organizing client files. He seemed relaxed, even cheerful, as he talked about his productive day at the office. I sat across from him at our dining table, picking at my lomine, studying his face as he lied to me with such casual ease. This was the man I had married, the man I had trusted with my life, my future, my deepest vulnerabilities. And he was living a completely separate existence that I was not part of. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Mrs. Williams and scheduled an extra therapy session. When I arrived at her office, I sat in the chair across from her desk, and for the first time in 8 months, I spoke. "My voice is back," I said, the words coming out rough but clear. "And I need your help with something." Mrs. Williams stared at me in shock when I spoke those first words in her office. Her pen dropped onto her notepad, and she leaned forward, eyes wide with disbelief and concern. "Rebecca, how long have you been able to speak?" she asked gently. "3 weeks," I admitted, my voice still carrying that new raspy quality. "Maybe longer. I've been testing it privately." She processed this information carefully, her professional training kicking in. "And you haven't told Daniel?"
No. The word came out sharper than I intended.
"I need time to figure some things out first. Can you help me with that?" Mrs. Williams agreed to keep my recovery confidential while we worked on strengthening my voice and developing a plan. Over the next several sessions, she helped me regain full control of my speech, teaching me exercises to smooth out the roughness and restore my natural tone. More importantly, she became my confidant, the only person who knew the truth about my situation. During those weeks of secret voice recovery, I became a detective in my own home. With Daniel believing I was still mute, he grew increasingly careless about hiding his affair. Phone calls with Melissa happened in the same room where I sat reading. He would speak in what he thought were coded terms. The Martinez property meant their usual hotel, showing the downtown listing meant an afternoon rendezvous, and client dinner meant an evening out together. I started documenting everything. While Daniel was at work, I searched through his belongings with methodical precision. In his dresser drawer, underneath old tax documents, I found hotel receipts dating back 10 months, 2 months before my accident. The betrayal hadn't started after I lost my voice. My silence had simply made it easier for him to pursue. His laptop proved even more revealing. Daniel had never been particularly tech-savvy, and his password was still our anniversary date. His email showed a trail of correspondence with Melissa that painted a picture of a relationship that had been developing for over a year. The early emails were professional, but gradually became more personal, then intimate. There were discussions about weekend trips I knew nothing about, complaints about having to deal with Rebecca's situation, and worst of all, conversations about their future together. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. One email from Melissa, sent just 2 weeks earlier, made my blood run cold. "I know this is complicated because of what happened to her, but we can't keep living like this forever. When are you going to tell her? She can't exactly argue with you about it." They were discussing my disability as if it were a convenient tool for Daniel to avoid difficult conversations. In their minds, my inability to speak made me unable to fight for my marriage or defend myself. They saw my silence as weakness, never imagining it could become my greatest weapon. I began planning my response with the same methodical approach I had once used for design projects. First, I needed to understand the full scope of their relationship and what they intended to do about our marriage. Second, I needed to protect myself financially and legally. Third, I needed to decide exactly how and when to reveal that their secret wasn't as secret as they believed. The financial investigation revealed more disturbing truths. Daniel had been gradually moving money from our joint accounts into a personal savings account I didn't know existed. The mortgage refinancing he had handled without my input had actually taken out equity from our house, equity that was now sitting in his private account. He had been systematically preparing to leave me while using my condition to prevent me from noticing or objecting. I contacted a lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, explaining my situation in a carefully worded email. She agreed to meet with me during one of Daniel's workdays, and I took a taxi to her downtown office. Speaking freely for the first time in months with someone other than Mrs. Williams felt both liberating and terrifying. "This is quite a complex situation," Jennifer said after I had explained everything. "The good news is that his financial maneuvering while you were incapacitated could work in your favor in divorce proceedings. The bad news is that proving adultery in Oregon doesn't affect property division as much as it might in other states." "I don't want his money," I told her. "I want something else." Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" I outlined my plan, and she listened with growing amazement. "That's unconventional," she said finally. "But given the circumstances, I think we can make it work. You'll need evidence, though. More than just hotel receipts and emails." That evening, I put the next phase of my plan into motion. Daniel had mentioned another client dinner for the following night, which I now knew meant a date with Melissa. Instead of sitting home alone as I had for months, I decided to follow them. I had never considered myself capable of surveillance, but desperation makes people resourceful. I borrowed a car from my neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Chen, telling her through written notes that I needed to run errands while Daniel was working late. She was happy to help, having felt sorry for me since my accident. Following Daniel to the Riverside Hotel downtown felt surreal. I sat in the hotel bar, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, watching my husband check in with another woman. They looked like any other couple, laughing, touching casually, completely comfortable with each other. Melissa wore a red dress I had never seen before, and Daniel had his hand on her lower back as they walked to the elevator. I stayed in that bar for 3 hours, nursing a single glass of wine and taking discreet photos with my phone. When they finally came back down, their hair was messed up and their clothes wrinkled, and they looked like people who had spent the afternoon in bed together. Daniel kissed her goodbye in the lobby, not a quick peck, but a long, passionate kiss that spoke of deep intimacy and familiarity. The drive home was a blur of tears and rage. I had seen the evidence with my own eyes, but witnessing their casual intimacy hurt more than I had expected. This wasn't just an affair, it was a full relationship happening parallel to our marriage, and I was the inconvenient obstacle they were working around. When Daniel came home that night, he looked relaxed and satisfied. He made up a story about a difficult client who had kept him out late, apologizing for missing dinner. I nodded sympathetically, playing the part of the understanding, voiceless wife, while inside I was planning his downfall. The next few weeks followed a similar pattern. Daniel would announce his work commitments, I would follow him, and I would document his activities. I learned that they had regular Tuesday lunch dates at a small Italian restaurant across town. Thursday evenings were reserved for drinks at an upscale cocktail bar. Weekends often involved elaborate day trips to coastal towns or mountain resorts. Most revealing were the conversations I overheard when Daniel thought I was sleeping or in another room. He would take calls from Melissa in our kitchen, speaking in low tones about their plans. During one such call, I heard him say, "We just need to wait a little longer. The doctors think her condition might be permanent, and if that's the case, I can file for divorce on grounds of fundamental change in circumstances. It sounds terrible, but legally, it gives me more options." They were waiting for my condition to be declared permanent so Daniel could divorce me more advantageously. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, using my disability as a legal strategy while simultaneously cheating on me with the woman who would replace me. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that my silence meant I was helpless, that my inability to speak translated to an inability to act. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The opportunity I had been waiting for came in the form of Daniel's company Christmas party. It was being held at the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, the same hotel where I had watched him check in with Melissa months earlier. Daniel asked if I felt up to attending, probably hoping I would decline and give him an excuse to go alone or with his mistress. "I'd love to come," I wrote on the notepad we kept for communication. "It's been so long since I've been to a social event." Daniel looked surprised but pleased. "Great," he said. "It'll be good for you to get out." I spent the week before the party preparing. Jennifer had helped me arrange for a court reporter to be present at the hotel that evening, positioned discreetly in the ballroom. I had given copies of all my evidence to a private investigator she recommended. Most importantly, I had been working with Mrs. Williams on what she called dramatic voice presentation, making sure that when I finally spoke publicly, my voice would be clear, strong, and impossible to ignore. The night of the party, I dressed carefully in a black cocktail dress that Daniel had bought me for our anniversary 2 years earlier. I styled my hair and applied makeup with more care than I had shown in months. When Daniel saw me, he smiled and said I looked beautiful, and for a moment I almost felt sad about what was going to happen. The party was exactly what I expected. A room full of real estate agents and their spouses, making small talk about market trends and vacation plans. Daniel introduced me to colleagues I had never met, explaining my condition with practiced sympathy. "Rebecca lost her voice in an accident earlier this year," he would say. "We're still hoping for a full recovery. I played my part perfectly, smiling and nodding, communicating through gestures and written notes. I watched Daniel work the room, charming clients and colleagues with the same effortless charisma that had first attracted me to him, and I waited. Melissa arrived fashionably late, wearing a stunning silver dress that caught the light as she moved. She greeted Daniel with professional politeness, but I caught the look that passed between them, intimate and knowing. She made her way through the crowd, eventually approaching us with a bright smile. "Rebecca," she said warmly, as if we were old friends, "it's so wonderful to see you out and about. You look absolutely gorgeous tonight." I smiled back at her, this woman who had been sleeping with my husband while discussing my permanent disability as a convenient legal strategy. This woman who thought my silence made me weak and helpless. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small notepad, writing carefully before showing her the message. "Thank you. I've been looking forward to this evening for months. There's something I've been wanting to say." Melissa read my note with a confused smile. "Something you've been wanting to say?" she asked, glancing around as if looking for clarification from someone who could translate my gestures. I nodded and wrote another message, taking my time with each letter. The anticipation in her eyes was almost amusing. She probably expected some heartfelt gratitude for her kindness toward the poor, voiceless wife. Instead, I showed her, "Yes, about the Martinez property and all those downtown listings you've been showing my husband." The color drained from Melissa's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her eyes darted to Daniel, who was across the room talking to his boss, completely unaware of what was happening. She looked back at my note, then at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "I don't know what you mean," she stammered, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. I smiled sweetly and wrote again, "Don't worry, you'll understand everything very soon." Before she could respond, I walked away, leaving her standing frozen by the appetizer table. I could feel her eyes following me as I made my way through the crowd, but I didn't look back. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Melissa now knew that her secret affair wasn't as secret as she had believed. I found Daniel near the bar, laughing at something his colleague Marcus Thompson was saying. When he saw me approaching, his face lit up with genuine affection, the same expression he used to give me before everything changed. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of grief for the marriage we used to have. "There's my beautiful wife," Daniel said, putting his arm around my waist. "Marcus was just telling me about his new listing in Lake Oswego." I smiled at Marcus and pulled out my notepad again. This time, I wrote a message for Daniel. "Can we talk privately? It's important." Daniel's expression shifted to concern. "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything okay?" I nodded toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the main crowd, but still visible to the other guests. As we walked, I noticed Melissa watching us from across the room, her face pale and anxious. She had probably spent the last few minutes trying to figure out how much I knew and whether she should warn Daniel. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked once we were relatively alone. "Are you feeling overwhelmed? We can leave if you need to." Instead of writing a response, I looked directly into his eyes, those familiar brown eyes that used to make me feel safe and loved, and I spoke. "I know about Melissa." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Daniel's face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, fear, and then a desperate attempt to regain composure. His mouth opened, but no words came out. After months of being the one unable to speak, I was now watching my husband rendered speechless. "Rebecca," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper, How long have you been able to?" 3 months, I said clearly, my voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby guests who were beginning to notice our conversation. 3 months of listening to your phone calls with your girlfriend. 3 months of watching you lie to my face every single day." Daniel looked around frantically, suddenly aware that we were in a public space surrounded by his colleagues and clients. "We need to discuss this at home," he said urgently. "This isn't the place. Actually, this is the perfect place," I interrupted. "Because all these people deserve to know what kind of man they've been doing business with." By now, our conversation had attracted attention. Marcus Thompson was staring openly, and I could see other guests turning toward us with curious expressions. The background noise of the party began to quiet, as people sensed drama unfolding. Daniel grabbed my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to show his desperation. "Rebecca, please, let's go home and talk about this properly. I can explain everything." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "Explain what, exactly?" "Explain how you started sleeping with Melissa 2 months before my accident. Explain how you've been stealing money from our joint accounts. Or maybe explain how you and your mistress have been discussing my permanent disability as a legal advantage in your divorce strategy." The last part was delivered loudly enough that several nearby conversations stopped entirely. Daniel's boss, Richard Hayes, had moved closer and was now listening with obvious interest. Melissa, meanwhile, had begun edging toward the exit, but I wasn't done with her yet. "Don't leave yet, Melissa," I called across the room, my voice carrying clearly in the increasingly quiet ballroom. "You're part of this conversation too." Every head in the room turned toward Melissa, who froze like a deer in headlights. She stood halfway between our corner and the exit, trapped by the attention of dozens of people who were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. "I don't know what she's talking about," Melissa said loudly, but her voice shook with obvious guilt. "Daniel, tell them this is some kind of misunderstanding." Daniel was now sweating visibly, his face red with embarrassment and panic. "Rebecca, I'm begging you, let's handle this privately. Think about what you're doing." "I have been thinking about it," I replied calmly. "For months, while you thought I was helpless and voiceless, I was actually planning. Did you know I hired a private investigator? He's been following you two for weeks. He has photos of you checking into the Riverside Hotel together, the same hotel where we're standing right now, actually." A murmur went through the crowd. Richard Hayes stepped forward, his expression serious. "Daniel, what is she talking about?" Before Daniel could answer, I continued. "He also has copies of all your emails discussing your affair and your plans to divorce me once my condition was declared permanent. You've been waiting for me to be officially diagnosed as permanently disabled so you could file for divorce on more favorable terms." The room was now completely silent except for my voice. Even the hotel staff had stopped what they were doing to listen. I could see people pulling out their phones, probably recording what was turning into the most dramatic scene any of them had ever witnessed at a company party. "That's not," Daniel started, but I cut him off. "And let's not forget about the money. $43,000 moved from our joint accounts into your private savings account. The equity loan on our house that I never signed for, because according to you, I was too incapacitated to understand financial documents." Richard Hayes looked like he had been slapped. "Daniel, is this true? Have you been embezzling from your disabled wife?" "It's not embezzlement," Daniel said desperately. "It's our money. I was just managing our finances during a difficult time." "Managing them into your personal account while planning to leave me for your mistress," I said. "That's an interesting definition of management." Melissa finally found her voice. "This is insane. She's clearly having some kind of breakdown. Daniel, we should call someone to help her." I turned to face her directly, and when I spoke, my voice was steady and cold. "I'm not having a breakdown, Melissa. I'm having a breakthrough. For the first time in almost a year, I'm speaking the complete truth to everyone in this room." I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "This contains printed copies of all your emails to each other. The ones where you complain about having to wait for the situation with Rebecca to resolve itself. The ones where you discuss weekend trips that Daniel paid for with money from our joint account. The ones where you talk about your future together once Daniel gets rid of his inconvenient, disabled wife." I walked toward Melissa, the crowd parting to let me through. When I reached her, I held out the envelope. "Would you like to read some of your own words out loud, or should I do it?" Melissa stared at the envelope like it was a snake about to bite her. "I'm not reading anything. This is harassment. This is justice," I corrected. "For months, you two have been making decisions about my life based on the assumption that I couldn't defend myself. You used my disability as a shield for your affair, and as a weapon in your planning. But the thing about assumptions is that they can be very, very wrong." I opened the envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper. "This is from an email you sent to Daniel 3 weeks ago. Would you like me to read it? Or would you prefer to tell everyone here what you wrote about how much easier your relationship would be once I was out of the picture permanently?" The silence in the room was deafening. I could see phones held up, recording every word. Richard Hayes looked like he was calculating how much damage this scandal would do to his business. Other guests were backing away from Daniel and Melissa, as if their moral corruption might be contagious. Daniel made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Rebecca, I know you're hurt, and you have every right to be, but destroying my career isn't going to fix our marriage. Let's go home and work this out like adults." I looked at him with something approaching pity. "Our marriage ended the day you decided I was too disabled to deserve the truth. It ended when you started stealing from me, while I recovered from an accident that nearly killed me. It ended when you and your girlfriend started planning your future together while lying to my face every single day." I turned to address the room at large. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Morgan. 11 months ago, I was in an accident that damaged my vocal cords. For months, the doctors weren't sure if I would ever speak again. During that time, my husband told me he loved me, that we would get through this together, that our vows meant something to him." My voice grew stronger as I continued. "Instead, he used my silence as an opportunity to steal from me, cheat on me, and plan to abandon me. He and his mistress discussed my condition like it was a convenient business opportunity. They waited for me to be declared permanently disabled so they could divorce me on terms that would benefit them financially." I looked directly at Daniel. "But here's what you never understood: my voice was never the source of my strength. My silence taught me to observe, to listen, to plan. While you thought you were taking advantage of a helpless woman, I was gathering evidence, consulting lawyers, and preparing for this moment." Richard Hayes stepped forward. "Daniel, I think you need to leave. Immediately. We'll discuss your employment status on Monday." "Richard, please." Daniel pleaded. "Let me explain." "Explain. What?" Richard's voice was harsh. "How do you steal from your disabled wife? How have you been conducting an affair with an employee on company time? How have you made our entire organization look like we employ people with no moral compass?" Melissa tried to slip away during this exchange, but I called after her. "Melissa, where are you going? Don't you want to stay and explain to everyone how you helped plan my husband's exit strategy? How do you research divorce law to find the best way to abandon a disabled spouse?" She turned back with tears in her eyes. "I never meant for any of this to happen. Daniel said you two were already having problems before your accident. He said, your marriage was over anyway. And you believed him because it was convenient," I replied. "It made you feel better about sleeping with a married man whose wife was recovering from a traumatic injury. It justified taking vacations with money that belonged to both of us, not just him." The crowd was getting restless, and I could see hotel security moving toward us. It was time to finish this. "I want everyone here to remember this moment," I said, raising my voice to address the entire room. "Remember that people who seem helpless might be more powerful than you think. Remember that silence doesn't always mean weakness. And remember that betraying someone's trust, especially when they're at their most vulnerable, says everything about your character and nothing about theirs." I turned back to Daniel one final time. "I filed for divorce this morning. You'll be served with papers tomorrow, along with a lawsuit for financial fraud and emotional distress. The house is in my name only, something you forgot when you thought I was too disabled to understand legal documents. You have until next weekend to remove your belongings." Daniel's face crumpled. "Rebecca, please, I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I love you." "No, you don't," I said quietly. "You love the idea of me as a convenient, silent accessory to your life. You love having someone who couldn't question your decisions or challenge your lies. But you never loved me, the real me, with opinions and strength, and the ability to fight back when necessary." I walked toward the exit, the crowd parting before me like I was royalty. As I reached the door, I turned back one last time. "Oh, and Daniel, my voice isn't just back, it's stronger than it ever was before. You'll be hearing a lot more from me through my lawyer." The last thing I saw before leaving was Daniel and Melissa standing in the middle of that silent ballroom, surrounded by the ruins of their carefully constructed lies, finally understanding that the woman they had underestimated was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. 3 days later, Daniel moved out of our house. 6 months later, our divorce was finalized with a settlement that returned every penny he had stolen, plus damages for his financial fraud. Melissa was fired from the real estate office after an internal investigation revealed she had been using company resources to facilitate the affair. I returned to work at the design firm, where my colleagues welcomed me back with genuine warmth and respect. My voice, though changed by the accident, became a symbol of survival and strength rather than loss. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the way I handled that night at the Christmas party. They suggest I could have confronted Daniel privately, that public humiliation was unnecessarily cruel. But I always tell them the same thing: Daniel and Melissa made their choices publicly, conducting their affair in plain sight while lying to everyone around them. They used my silence as a shield for their betrayal. It was only fitting that my voice became the sword that destroyed their deception. The accident that took my voice temporarily taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is listen, observe, and wait for the perfect moment to speak. When that moment comes, you better make sure your words count. And mine certainly did. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.